This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into SportsDay Insider presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my old pals, Grant and Calvin Watkins. So, Calvin,
Hang on, I resent that remark.
What remark?
I am not old compared to you.
The term is not, it means that you've been a pal for a long time. But it's getting a shorter and shorter leash on that friendship, I can tell you that.
All right, fine.
Anyway, as I was saying, Calvin, week to week with the Cowboys, we're all over the map here. It's when you expect them to do something, they do just the opposite. They played really well against the Jets. We try to understand the fact that the Jets are terrible. Justin Fields is terrible, and then we gave them some bonus points because the Jets' defensive line is pretty good, and the Cowboys were able to run the ball against them. And then, of all things, Rico Dowdle calls them out, tells them they better buckle up, gets national news about that. Everybody talking about the fact that Rico Dowdle's calling them all up, calling them out, and saying, you better be buckled up. And what happens? As Rico said, they wasn't buckled up, And, Calvin, I got to tell you, and I don't believe in this kind of thing for the most part about players showing emotion and all that kind of stuff. But I will say, in that game, it didn't seem to me like anybody held anything against Rico. It was like, he'd get up after a play, everybody just walk away. Nobody's saying anything. Nobody's it's not chippy. Nobody's barking. Nothing. They just seemed flat. And one of the things that was said after the game was they didn't play with any physicality. And that's an indictment of this team, that you have a guy call you out, and then you still don't respond with any physicality, whether that's because that's just who you are. You're just not a physical defense, which we do think there's some of that is true, right? I mean, that's kind of been their MO here over the last few years when they couldn't stop the run. When you can't stop the run, it's because you're not physical, in my estimation. Isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's 100% correct. It's funny you say that about no one was talking trash to Rico. Before the game, and this was something that got kind of lost. Maris Leofau, this was in pregame warmups. He got into it with the assistant special teams coach and had to be separated. And
the Panthers assistant.
Yeah, they were talking trash, and Maris got in his face, and they had to be separated. And Brock Hoffman.
Wait, I'm confused. It was the Cowboys assistant special teams coach or the Panthers?
No. I'm sorry, the Panthers.
Okay.
Panthers. I'm sorry. Excuse me. I'm sorry. The Panthers assistant special teams coach got into it with Maris Leofau before the game. This was like in pregame warmups. And then Brock Hoffman, who's a feisty offensive lineman, he also got involved in it. And then that was it, right? And then at halftime, well, because the way this stadium is structured, the teams have to cross each other to get to the tunnels, right? At halftime. So we're all looking to see will anything happen, right? So Rico Dowdle was like one of the last guys off the field, and he's just shooting the bull with Trayvon Diggs. Like, yo, what's up? Hey, what's going on? You good? Yeah, we're good. As they're going into the tunnel at halftime. So I'm glad you said that, Kevin. Because thinking back on the game, there wasn't any, chirping. There was nothing. It was just like, oh, we tackled you. Hey, how you doing? You okay? Yeah, I'm good. Now, I'm not even going to say that's old school, but yet a running back called you out and you didn't respond. The only person that really responded was Kenny Clark in the locker room when he said, this is in the week, leading up to the game, when he said, yeah, he don't know the Cowboys. We'll be ready, right? Everybody else, also Digizua, Dak Prescott, they all said, yeah, we know Rico. That's our boy. We'll see him, right? Dak made a joke that said, yeah, we are going to be buckled up when we get on the plane to go to Charlotte. So there was no...
That's not a great joke.
That's not...
That's not a great joke. And I got to say...
It went right over my head. Right over my head.
If Kenny Clark is the guy answering the bulletin board material, I'm not sure because I don't know that Kenny Clark has a whole lot of history with either this defense or with Rico Dowdle.
No, neither one.
All of this is very disturbing. I got to tell you,
Well,
this is all
listen,
very disturbing.
and I don't like I
I'm
want to say,
disturbed with all of you guys too, by the way.
what's that?
Because it dawned on me, I don't know, midway through the second quarter, right, that the Cowboys, they were playing on the road second consecutive week. And I went back to the paper and I checked everybody's prediction, and you guys all had the Cowboys winning. And it just dawned on me at that point in time that, like, there's no way that this team, I don't care who the opponents are, there's no way this team is capable of winning back-to-back weeks on the road. And I think that's just how it played out. They're not a good defense, and they can't keep up a consistent performance from one week to the next. And so I just thought that so much was stacked against them. This team was not going to win. And Calvin, I know we got to get into all the defensive issues, and Kevin's got a list of them. So let's just, I've scolded you both.
Well,
Let's move on.
we get enough of that from readers, and people say, "Oh, I can't believe you guys picked them." It's like, we spend about, I don't know, 6 seconds on that, and then people like you, that's all they take out of everything. Well, did you pick
Headline,
them to lose or
Sherrington, we
win?
don't care about picks.
Well, you can put that headline on there for me. I don't care about my picks. They're ridiculous. They're ridiculous. So, but my, I don't want to get too much into this old school thing, but I think at some point when someone pushes you so far, there has to be a response. Darren Woodson, told me one time that one of the things he can't stand about the game as it is today. He says, back in the day when we played somebody, we weren't helping people up. We on the field, we didn't do that kind of stuff. We were trying to crush you out there. We weren't being old pals. And I don't want to get into that whole thing because Darren played 30 years ago, right? So it's a different world now from what it was then with players. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but at some point you have got to say, "Wow, you just made fun of us. And where's your pride here? You just said I'm gonna run all over you guys," and that's exactly what he did. Calvin, you had a stat there from Next Gen that said that he got 122 of his yards after contact. That is an unbelievable stat. I mean, 122 yards on itself is a great game, right? And he's got 122 yards after contact. That's just unbelievable. Watching that game, it was like there was not a single devastating hit on him in that game. I mean, there might have been one. I got to tell you, it was one of the safeties, I believe it was, who came up and kind of took him head on and got up and said something. I thought that was the closest thing I saw in the entire game. But otherwise, I just thought that said everything about this team, about the defense, about, and we're going to talk about some of the other issues here with some of the players and who are the keepers and who are not, and whether, Matt Eberflus's scheme should be altered. I think clearly they're going to do that because I'd be fine with them just getting rid of the players, frankly, most of them. But you can't do that now. It's such a mess on the defensive side of the ball, and it makes me wonder. And as I asked you before we started the podcast, I guess I just start with that, Calvin. How much of this was Micah Parsons covering up?
I think a lot of it. When you have a generational talent like Micah Parsons, he can cover up some of your deficiencies, and that's what he did. I mean, you would have to put 2 offensive linemen on him, right? Or a tackle and a tight end, or a tackle and a running back. So of 11 guys, you could take 1 out, that's the quarterback, and then you got to take 2 guys of the 11 on 1 guy. So there's 3 people that are out of the equation. The quarterback's got to throw the ball and 2 offensive linemen. So it's a numbers game, right? So now when you take that player off the field and Micah Parsons, now you're back to even in a sense, right? So the Cowboys don't have a pass rusher that opposing offenses are worried about. And that's their problem.
When you talk about game-changing talents, right? I mean, that's what you're talking about in a generational talent, and we're seeing it play out in real life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, Brian Schottenheimer was asked this the other day, how much of these struggles related to you don't have Micah Parsons? And he said it doesn't matter who we had. We could have had 3 sacks with Micah. We could have 10 sacks with Micah. It doesn't matter. We still have to make plays with the people that we have, right? And last year, Micah missed 4 games because of a high ankle sprain. The defense struggled. They struggled, right? And he was on the roster, but he was just hurt. So a lot of guys that they put hopes on to produce in the pass rush game are not coming through for them. They changed the scheme from a man-heavy scheme to whatever the zone scheme is. Last year, they were in a zone scheme for a little bit under Mike Zimmer, but Zimmer kind of kept some of the principles they had from Dan Quinn. Eberflus comes in here and he just changes the whole thing and says, "I'm going to play zone because that's what I played in Chicago. That's what I played in Indianapolis." And that's fine. You play your scheme, but as you guys know, you guys have covered sports a long time, is it about your scheme or is it about the players, right?
It's always about the players. You're
Right.
not gonna.
It doesn't
You
seem
hope to
like that
coach up
here.
your talent, but you're not
Mhm.
gonna change your talent to fit the scheme. And I think just from the things that we talked about before we started this, right? There's this mismatched personnel for the ideology. You've
Mhm.
taken out a generational talent, and you've kind of got. I think you guys basically said what amounts to subpar talent on the defense. And then mix in, Calvin, just what you said on the zone defense thing. When you guys are talking about not hitting anybody or lack of physicality, is a zone defense not kind of a more passive scheme than man is? Man's simple for guys, right? I've got this guy, and if and I am going to stick him. The zone is. We saw it happen with McMillan. The guys just lost coverage because it's a passive scheme.
It's a passive scheme that is designed to prevent you from getting beat with deep passes and long runs. We're going to keep people in front of us, right? So we're going to play to the sticks. It's 3rd and 7, so we're going to play 5 yards, and we're going to tackle you after 5 yards until you get off the field, right? Man to man is what you said. It's man to man. We're going to knock your block off, and then you get off the field. So, but the interesting thing is Rod Marinelli, who is the father of this scheme that Matt Eberflus is using, he was in Tampa Bay, right? In Tampa Bay, you had Warren Sapp and all these dudes who are Hall of Famers and John Lynch that went after the quarterback with 4 guys. So unless you have 4 dynamic pass rushers up front, your scheme is really nothing. And they don't have 4 dynamic pass rushers to run this scheme. They have to change up how they're doing things. And I don't know if Eberflus has another way of changing it.
All right, so Calvin, let's get to something that, and we probably buried the lead here, is that, and you also wrote, because with some of the things that Trayvon Diggs told you, and then just in your conversations with other players, that essentially they don't believe in the defense. And as you wrote, the question becomes now, can Brian Schottenheimer keep all this from unraveling? If you've got players saying publicly that, hey, this isn't really working, that's never good. I mean, can you imagine this happening when Jimmy Johnson was the head coach? One of the players saying this. Bill Parcells was the head coach. One of the players saying this. Whatever went wrong under Mike McCarthy, no one was saying, "Hey, I don't believe in this defense. We're not used to it. It's not really good for us." This becomes a really critical moment, as you wrote, in the season to see if Brian Schottenheimer can get this figured out to do enough to placate these guys without throwing his defensive coordinator under the bus.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, Trayvon Diggs is right in a lot of ways, right, about the scheme. But you could also say he's got an axe to grind because they took $500,000 from him because he didn't work out the whole offseason. So why would he say anything positive? However, before the season started, Diggs said, "Hey, I like the scheme. I think we can make plays in the scheme." So before the season started, all the players were like they were down for the scheme. Now we get into the season, and Diggs has become the face of this thing, and he says, "I don't know about this scheme." They're paying Trayvon Diggs $97 million. DeRon Bland $90 million in total compensation. They have 0 pass breakups and 0 interceptions. And Jerry Jones was asked on the radio on Tuesday about, are you getting value here out of these 2 corners? These are 2 corners. These are your best players. And the reason why you paid these guys is because they made plays in man-to-man defenses. And now you bring in a guy who plays a zone. So are you getting value for them? And he said, yeah, we are. I still believe in the zone defense. So Evan is right. The ideology is all jacked up. This was a bad hire. Matt Eberflus.
And whose hire is this? Was this
Jerry Jones.
Jerry's, or was it
Jerry Jones? Jerry Jones has a philosophy on, like, when this, you can go back 2 years. When Dan Quinn left to become the head coach of the Washington Commanders, the Cowboys had a chance to say, all right, Joe Witt, we will promote you to defensive coordinator, and you can run the same defensive scheme that has gotten us success. Jerry likes to have former head coaches to be the coordinator, whether it's on offense or defense. So he said, I'm going to hire Mike Zimmer. Old Mike Zimmer, head coach of Minnesota, defensive coordinator in Cincinnati, D.C. here in Dallas. Old friend. He's like our uncle. So he brings Zimmer back. Zimmer tries to keep some of Dan Quinn's scheme, but then later in the year he goes, man, I can't even coach this thing. And then he goes back to zone. And then before the season started, we asked Zimmer, do you still have the bite? Are you still a fiery guy? He's like, yeah, I'm fiery. But then late in the year he goes, I didn't have the bite. I'm a grandpa. I'm a softie. I have a 25-year-old girlfriend and I own horses. I'm not the same guy. So that's who they hire as a defensive coordinator. So then they go, all right, you get rid of his butt. Now we bring in Matt Eberflus. He got his butt kicked in Chicago for 3.5 years. He's beaten down in Chicago, right? Beaten down. They bring him in and he changed the whole scheme. So all of this is Jerry Jones, right?
Also a former Cowboys assistant.
Yes, he was a former linebackers coach, and he learned under Rod Marinelli. So, and if you watch Eberflus's news conferences, you would think the team is 0-12. He's just, hey guys, how you doing? I'm good. So, what do you think about the pass rush? We'll get there. I'm confident in it. He's got no enthusiasm. He's just, So that's who you got leading a group of men. Those are your coordinators.
See, this is part of my issue with the Cowboys all along, and I've talked about this before. They're just not. One of the things that Trayvon Diggs said was that we don't have an identity. The Cowboys have never had an identity under Jerry Jones. They just go
really.
Well, they just go for one defensive. I mean, since the mid-90s,
Okay.
They just
they
go
had
for
an
one
identity with Micah there?
Well, yeah, they're a great pass rushing team. But what I'm saying is that when they change defensive coordinator, they just go from one to the next. It's whoever, you don't keep the same thing. It's just what Calvin was saying. Why didn't they keep Joe Witt? Well, just for the reasons Calvin laid out. This is the impact Jerry has. When people talk about, well, it's bad that he's the GM, and it's like, well, there's a lot of things about all that stuff that's just window dressing with Jerry. He is letting people do certain things, but this is the poor impact he is having, is making those kinds of decisions, saying, no, I want this kind of guy for it. So instead of having some stability here, the Cowboys don't have that. To me, it doesn't make any sense. It'd be like if the Rangers or the Mavericks or whatever, every time you changed, philosophies, it's like, I will give Nico Harrison this. He believes in defense. That's who we want to be. We want to be a defensive team. Well, they've turned into a great defensive team, at the price of generational talent, but they have at least done that. This is who they are, right? Before that, they were an offensive team. Well, now they're a defensive team. At least there is an identity here of who we are. With the Cowboys, it's, they believe in their offense, and that's kind of who they've been. But I would like to at least see that year in and year out, we're going to play man to man, or or we're going to be zone, or whatever it is that you want to be. Although people really aren't playing that much zone anymore. That's the other issue with Eberflus, and I'm sure that the players look at it like, why are we doing this and nobody else is? And it's not working. And to your point, Calvin, earlier when you say that about those guys whom they believed in before, they got to blame somebody, right? When I'm not getting interceptions or pass deflections, that's on the coaches. That's not on me. No one's going to say that. So I will say this: everybody's at fault here. They don't have enough. They didn't assemble enough talent. They don't have the right kind of players, and they got the wrong kind of coaches. So frankly, I don't know what else they could do wrong. They pretty much covered the spectrum here on everything they could do wrong.
Well, and then you could change the entire dynamic of the defense a week before the season started to just add to all of that. So
yeah,
that just complicated matter all the worse. They're just not a serious franchise. I mean, I don't know any other way to describe it at this point.
Well, I mean, you can. In some ways, we've always said that with Jerry, right? That he's more concerned with making money. He's more concerned with being a soap opera 365 days a year. I have always argued the point when people say he doesn't care about winning. He does care about winning because winning makes him more money. I mean, there are two reasons that Jerry, the things that drive him. One, he wants to make more money. Two, he wants to prove he can win it without Jimmy, right? And so those two things drive him very much. But I will not deny that he probably cares more about making money than he does about winning. I think it's close, but that's always on top. And he wants to do it his way. He doesn't want to do it anybody else's way, because if he does it his way, he proves that he is right. If he does it someone else's way, it doesn't prove anything. That was the Super Bowls he won with Jimmy. And with Barry, he feels like, I didn't really do this on my own. The Barry Switzer Super Bowl, that was with Jimmy's personnel, right? And remember, what was the first thing that Switzer said up on the podium afterwards? We did it our way, baby. Well, you didn't really. I mean, this was Jimmy's team. That Lombardi Trophy had Jimmy's fingerprints all over it. So then that will drive Jerry Jones until his grave, is that he wants to prove he can win without all that. But when he makes decisions like this, these are the concrete examples of the negative impact that Jerry has on the team. You can always point at other things and say, well, I don't think this is really the case, because we know what Will McClay does with the draft now, that he's the guy in charge of that. And I guess, Calvin, we need to look at that as well. I mean, we've all said, because Will turned around the draft, because they were drafting terribly for 10 years or more, and then when he came in and was in charge, it upgraded immensely. But when we look at it, are the best players that he was getting mostly on offense and not on defense?
He got a pretty good one on defense.
Well, he got one, yeah, and they kind of lucked into that, because that's not the guy they wanted, right? And if they had gotten Patrick Surtain, that would have been fine. He's been a former defensive player of the year if they had gotten him, the cornerback for the Broncos. But they traded down and still got the best guy in that draft. So that was a phenomenal pick. And of course, they traded him.
And listen, before we get out of the defensive part, I looked up one stat because I had a little bit of time yesterday. And we just need to get into the realm here that this is not just a bad defense, and all the things that you guys said, right, Kevin, the way you outlined it just a minute ago, it's a historically bad defense. I believe in the era of the passing quarterback, so we're talking about teams that have thrown at least 200 passes over the first 6 games of the season. The Cowboys have allowed the 11th highest passer rating in history.
Pretty good.
There's an identity for you.
And here's the thing: of the quarterbacks they've played, only one ranks in the top 12 in the NFL in quarterback rating. Jordan Love. They've allowed this to not good quarterbacks. It's just astounding how bad this defense is. Calvin, I think you've done some stuff on how bad the scoring defense is, and the fact that teams that have allowed 180 points don't make the playoffs. at this point, the teams that have allowed 180 points through the first 6 games don't make the playoffs. It's historically bad. It's not just Cowboys bad. It's historically bad.
Well, I think it's a great point you made about the quarterbacks. They hadn't really faced any good ones yet, other than Jordan Love. Jordan Love's a good quarterback. Yeah.
Russell Wilson, a nice little game against them.
Who's no longer starting for the New York Giants. This is and Calvin, you pointed this out too. It's just crazy things on that last drive where the Panthers took 2 days to go down the field, and there was like a 3rd and 4, and he throws to Renfro, and meanwhile Deron Bland is like 8 yards off of him. It's like but if I'm going to there's no way that Hunter Renfro is going to beat Deron Bland on that play, right? I mean, to go deep. It's just not going to happen. They're not going to risk that on that play. Of course they're going to throw short here. And so, to me, if I'm Deron Bland, I'm the happiest guy on the earth that Hunter Renfro, a guy who's been bouncing around the league now for the last couple of years, is the guy right in front of me. And I'm going to get up right in his face, and I'm going to keep him from getting this route. But instead, that happened at another point in the game where they're playing so far off these guys. I don't know if some of that is scheme and some of that is in the case of a guy like Trayvon Diggs, who has always relied on his speed. Right? He was never a technique guy. The way that he made his money in the NFL was just because of a near Dion-like speed and quickness out there. He was always able to recover once he'd made a mistake, and now he's not able to do that anymore.
It's the funny thing about that Deron Bland play. It was apparently, yes, it was stunning to see that Deron Bland was backing up on a 3rd and 4, whatever it was. He's backing up 7 yards back, right? Is that Kenneth Murray, who's a linebacker, he's running back there to try to do something. So we don't know if Kenneth Murray was supposed to drop back in coverage and Deron Bland's supposed to drop back in coverage and Murray was supposed to be in that spot where the ball eventually went. So, but the fact is, why are you playing zone on a 3rd and 4? You should be playing man to man, right?
Right.
So you could say Murray really messed that up, and we get it. But why is Deron Bland in the slot playing off coverage? That's the problem with the scheme right there. And you got Bryce Young, who, man, I can't believe he carved up the Cowboys, right? He's throwing a slant for the first down. The scheme is I think Mike McCarthy used to make fun of the scheme off the record to us. Because when he'd see this scheme, he would say, "Oh, I'm carving this up because it's going to be open holes in the zone," And when Jerry talks about the Kenny Clark trade, we're going to stop the run. Well, I remember when he played Chicago, the Bears ran the ball like 12 consecutive times on a drive. If you have a good run defense, the team's not going to run the ball 12 consecutive times on you on one drive. Right? Yeah. Rico Dowdle is not going to rush for almost 200 yards against it, right? It's Rico Dowdle. Rico went to Carolina, and he was the backup to Chuba Hubbard, okay? And Chuba gets hurt, and now Rico's Jim Brown all of a sudden. So, and the Cowboys can't stop him. So this whole thing is a mess all the way around defensively.
So, all right, before we get out of here, we need to talk about what happened on the offensive side. So why couldn't they run the ball? They've been great all year long. Javonte Williams has been great all year long. I thought he was the difference maker on this team, certainly on the offense. And then they averaged 1.6 yards a carry. What happened?
I don't think the offensive line was as physical as they needed to be. When we talk about the defensive line, the offensive line wasn't as physical. And that was surprising because they got Tyler Smith and Tyler Guyton back from injuries. So the previous week in New York, they were missing 4 starters on the offensive line, and to go in Carolina, they got 2 of those guys back. So they just weren't as physical enough. They really don't have a number 2 running back that can be a change of pace for Javonte Williams. So we'll see what they do against Washington on Sunday if the running game can kind of get back on track. But I was very surprised at how poor the run game was. But in some ways, Dak Prescott kind of covered up for them. Right? He's throwing the ball over the field with George Pickens. So, and he's got these scrub receivers helping him, like Cropper and all these other dudes, Tolbert, and George Pickens is jumping over guys. He's like a superhero out there. He's just having a ball. So the offense kind of is keeping these guys afloat for right now.
Yeah, but that just, as we know, that's not a recipe for success, though. If you're trying to outscore everybody, if everybody's going to score 30 points on you, at least you're starting with that. You got to get to 30. You know that, right? With the Cowboys, they have to get to 30 to win these games, and it's going to be close then. That's no guarantee either. That's a lot of pressure to put on an offense week after week, and that's why it didn't work against Carolina. They got to the end of that game, and then all of a sudden they didn't have a running game, and it didn't work. Right? I mean,
they got a kicker. Cowboys got a good kicker.
Yeah, they got a good kicker.
You can score 3 touchdowns. That's 21 points, right? Then you got a kicker. You can get to 2 field goals. So, you're close. You're getting there. You're getting to 30.
Okay. So, Calvin, let me ask you this. How much longer do you think, at what point do we call the season? At what point do we say, that's it, no more? They need to be trying to get out of here and get the best draft pick they can.
I've kind of moved on. When they lost in Carolina, I was.
You moved on already. That was it for you. That was enough.
I was booking my flight for the combine at that point, so I was kind of.
Now, look, I mean, I will say this, right? I watched the Falcons last night against Buffalo, and they played a great game and beat a great playoff contender. And Carolina beat Atlanta 30-0 earlier this season. So I'm not singularly going to say that this is the end of the Cowboys season, but guys, can they go? I mean, this is silly to even say this. They've got to basically go 4-0 over the next 4 games to have a shot based on how the season ends.
Well, they might be able to beat Washington. Washington lost a tough game to Chicago on Monday night. And then they got to go to Denver. Denver's got a fantastic defense. The Cowboys, by the way, are 1-3 on the road. So they got to go to Denver. And then Arizona.
Arizona.
Yeah, Arizona. Kyler Murray is 7-0 in this building, right? Counting high school and college. And then you got Vegas.
When he was in high school, he probably played better defenses than the Cowboys.
Okay, that's going to do it. That'll be the end of our Cowboys segment of the podcast today. We thank Calvin for coming in and talking with us about this disaster. I don't think it's going to get any better, but we'll keep talking about them. So that'll be the good thing.
See you guys.
All right,
See you, Calvin.
Well, Evan, so we had the press conference last Friday morning with Skip Schumaker. Thought he handled himself well in that room. That's the first time I've ever talked to him or been around him. I'm assuming you've talked to him more than I have, obviously. And what was your impression of him just the first time out of the box?
First impression was they need to not have many pictures of him and Chris Young standing next to one another.
You know what? I was sitting next to Mac Engel, and I leaned over and I said, Rangers, Chris Young has hired his son to be the manager.
Skip is listed at 5'10", and CY is at 6'10". There was a foot difference, and Ross Fenstermaker, who was on the other flank, is like 6'3". It was a stunning difference in height. But it
was not a good look. That's one of those things too. I don't want to argue with Skip. I've not stood next to him. I'm 5'11". I am exactly 5'11". I'm not lying about it like everybody else lies about their height. And but I got to tell you, I think that he's got to be 5'8". That picture was so ridiculous.
It was.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I don't know if they needed to have a little soapbox there or whatever, but whatever. I did think that the press conference went well. I thought all the things that I expected to hear from Skip, I heard. I think I don't know if it was you or who it was that got him to kind of outline that business acronym, the CAPE acronym. for communication, alignment, preparation, and execution. And I mean, he's also said that a lot of these slogans and things are all just eyewash to him, and I think this is more an ideology than a slogan for him, that he believes, like, I'm going to communicate directly, going to make sure everybody is aligned. I'm going to make sure we're prepared for that. And then the next thing is up to the players.
Right. No, I think it's fine. I think it's interesting, and that I did not ask that question, but I did write about it, and it's funny because I was talking to Elena on the way out, and he's the one that brought up Ron Washington's ace, and added to commitment and then effort. And it's funny to me that what we've added since then, and everybody talks about now, is communication, right? That I think that was always taken for granted, right? That people knew what was going on, but now you have to say that. We have to make a commitment to it because clearly people think there isn't communication. And so, we went from a manager, Bruce Bochy, who, kind of assumed that the veterans knew what to do. And he didn't have to be beaten on them about it all the time. And he certainly didn't want to be in the clubhouse doing that. He expects his leaders in the clubhouse to push his message. And that's, as we discovered about the team, they don't have any leaders in the clubhouse, and not anybody who's going to push the message anyway. So that probably requires somebody who's going to be a little more vocal about it, a little more upfront about it, and I think that's what they're hoping they'll get from Skip Schumaker.
Kevin, I'm going to correct you on one thing, right? I think it's a really minor detail, but I would say there are no leaders on the position player side.
Oh yeah, no question, you're right.
Nathan Eovaldi, again, I've rarely been around a player that has that kind of investment, but yeah, that is an issue. And listen, I think that when you've got so many people in a baseball clubhouse now, you've got so much support staff. It used to be 15 years ago, you had basically one hitting coach. Now you've got three. And so there are so many different messages, and you get a little bit of Tower of Babel effect, I think, sometimes when so many different people are communicating things, and you want to have something a little bit more streamlined. And I think that's the issue that a lot of teams have run into, is I want this messaging to be streamlined and I want it to be direct. And I do think that is something that Skip believes in. And I think that this is, if there is, I'm not even going to say a shortcoming in Bruce Bochy's game, but I think you described it really well. This is a guy who was hired to manage a veteran team that knew what they were doing. This team has shown that they don't know what they're doing as well, and they've gotten a little bit younger with some key players over the last couple of years. And I think that requires a manager who's going to be either more direct or more present in the clubhouse. And I think that is what Skip Schumaker does.
Yeah, it is, or apparently it is. I'm still intrigued by everything in Florida. I know we've kind of waved off the whole thing. Was that, well, that's Florida and it's a crazy place. They won 2 World Series and dismantled the teams both times, and he's the NL Manager of the Year in 2023. And then at the end of that season, there was a death in his family, and he took
No,
time off.
that was 24. That
24.
20,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, 24 is when he had when he left at the end of the year, and then he just didn't go back. And so I know there was a change in the general manager and a change in everything there, but it's unusual for a manager just to walk away from a job. Now I'm assuming he felt like I can get another job, and he kind of did talk about that a little bit. At the press conference the other day about, he wasn't sure what he was going to do at that point. But it speaks to me a little bit about a guy that, hey, this is what I believe. And if you don't believe that, I'm out of here. I'm not going to try to make I'm not going to bend my principles or bend what I think is what you want to win. He was very careful about what he said about comparing Texas with Florida, but he did make it very clear that he feels like this organization is much better aligned, that everybody sees things the same way, and so and obviously you would expect that, right? And they're only 2 years removed from winning a World Series, so
More
You,
committed
you
to
would hope
winning
that.
is what I took out of that than Miami is. That's one thing I took out of it. And I think all your points are really well said, and I think it's also why the more I thought about this in the hours after it was announced that Bruce Bochy wouldn't be back, that I was convinced that Skip was going to take this job either with other jobs coming available, because I think the word that keeps coming to my mind is he's deliberate and intentional, and he had spent a year gathering information and learning this team and felt like, I know what I want to do. I know what my action plan is going to be here. And that puts me a step ahead of anywhere else I'd be. And that's why I thought that the only thing that was left to be determined was how much leverage he would exercise over Chris Young in that negotiation. And I mean, if you look back at it, and I don't have anything to back this up right now other than conjecture, but you hired Bruce Bochy, a Hall of Fame manager, and gave him a 3-year deal. And then when you change managers, you gave Skip Schumaker a 4-year deal. I'm not surprised if Skip got an extra year of commitment out of that because of the leverage he had.
That could be, and because we know that right when that the season-ending presser, nothing was done that morning, and then by that evening, it's all of a sudden done. I don't doubt that because of the questions that were asked and because of the way we were pressing him about this situation and the fact that we were writing that, hey, he went back to California, without the job, without saying he wanted it. I mean, I don't doubt that in Chris Young that might have motivated him a little bit to say, go ahead and say, all right, let's go ahead and get this done. So I think that's probably all true. I will say this too about his decision is that I don't know what fans think. I know what some of them think, but there's a question for me about, okay, this guy's been in the organization for a year and it was not a good year. And so there would be a question of whether, do you think now that this isn't right? There's something wrong here. And I think the fact that he said, yeah, I'm going to take the job, probably should give fans some kind of feeling that, all right, listen, it hasn't all gone to hell in a handbasket here. It's a question of getting the right guys on the field, but everything else is okay. Because I hear from fans saying too that they're ready to get rid of Chris Young, and I think that's silly at this point.
Which is funny because 2 years ago, I remember hearing fans left and right saying, "I'm good now for the rest of my life. I'm good." And then by the middle of last year, they were ready to get rid of Bochy. They were ready to get rid of Chris Young. It's amazing how fans change their tune very quickly.
Oh yeah, I wrote that column early last year about how long will the honeymoon last, and I got buried by people. Oh, you're an idiot. You're just trying to cause trouble. This is good. Just what you said. This is good for me for the rest of my life. And I thought, well, first of all, if that's your attitude, that's wrong. You shouldn't feel that way about your team. You should always want your team to be competitive and win.
Oh, I listen. I got no. If people are happy and they're just happy, I got zero issue with that. I do think, like, I got pushback when I wrote, that 2023 shows all the signs of a fluke, and it didn't mean that the team wasn't talented. It's just that the team did not. It had multiple losing seasons before 23 and multiple losing seasons after 23. That was the aberration. It wasn't the opening of a giant contention window. That was my point. And listen, I get that fans want to win too, and I just think that we're getting off target here because this is the whole tangent of what fans believe, and you can't
Right.
explain fan behavior or fan, and it involves emotion. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, so when the time we got left here, a couple of minutes to talk about the Rangers at this point, Evan, we still don't have any indication from Ray Davis about what the budget will be. We are pretty sure though it will not go over the competitive balance tax, which will be right around 244 million. So, and that is below that is above what they had last year. They're going to lose about 50 million in salary, probably by not bringing guys back. So that does give them a budget. If he comes in right around 240, you said you don't have a problem with that.
Look, if Ray just wants to get under 244, that's fine. I mean, they could keep the payroll flat, and with the number of contracts they've got coming off, they could still do some things to improve this team. But I get the impression that the payroll is going to be under what it was this year, and that's where you get into the slippery slope. Is their payroll basically came to 241 this year? Is under 240, or is under 220, or is under 200? And we still don't have answers on that, and I think that's still somewhat being determined. And I got to tell you, from my perspective, it's a little bit. I'm not going to say it's terribly disconcerting at the moment, but right now you've got this month to basically start planning out what your free agency and trade scenarios are going to be. And if you've got to create 3 different scenarios, that seems like a lot of wasted energy.
Boy, no kidding. Well, they have to. I mean, I'm assuming
And wasted energy that could be used. It could be used elsewhere. I should have said that. Yeah.
Sure. I have to assume that Chris Young has an idea of the ballpark he's talking about here. That it's not going to be 200. It is going to be somewhere between 230 and 240. It needs to be the upper end of that. He just needs to, if he wants to keep it under the tax, I get that, and that's fine. And look, maybe he keeps it under. He comes in at 230 and says, at the trade deadline, you need to make a deal, and we're contending. I'm happy to go up to it at that point. If that's what he wants to do, I'm fine with that. It would be better if they went over. I think, as I wrote that, column 2 weeks ago, saying that they need to be competitive. They need to be in the top, 6, 7. They're the 4th largest market. Why not? When you don't have the farm system doing when the farm system is not producing consistently, and by consistent, I don't mean that every year they're churning out players. But every 2 to 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, you need to be producing a major league ball player, from that farm system. And if they're good enough, you could cover up a lot of sins, right? If you get a couple of guys, you get a Wyatt Langford every 5 or 6 years, well, you're doing great then, and you're not having to spend nearly as much money, and it all works out great. The problem is that they have just not done that. And I have to wonder at this point, Evan, and we have never talked about this, but is Kip Fagg going to be able to keep his job if they are not producing any more than they are?
Yeah, listen, I do think that the organization has become more productive over the last 10 years. And I do think Kip has acknowledged that he kind of had a little bit of a come to meeting kind of approach after some really unsuccessful drafts. But listen, that's always the question, right? He's been in the scouting director's job for a very long time here, relatively speaking. If Josh Young is playing well, that's one thing. You've got Wyatt Langford. You've got, if Evan Carter is healthy and playing, that's another thing. But right now, you've got no idea about Evan Carter, and you've got less idea about Josh Young than you had. And it looks like the 24 draft right now, which was topped by Malcolm Moore, and the Rangers were drafting 30th that year. That's not looking like a great draft at this moment. So I think, yeah, I mean, there's when you've been in a job a long time and you're not producing year in and year out, there's always going to be those questions. I think that Kip is very, now you got a Kip and a Skip.
Kip and Skip. Sounds like a 50s Walt Disney movie, doesn't it?
Need to hire Bip Roberts too, and we'd be fine. But I do think that, those are all fair questions. And I will say this about the organization. I do think that pitching wise, and I just was looking at something, Baseball America, I don't know what their metric is on doing this, but Baseball America had the Rangers farm system ranked 10th when it came to fastball pitchers. And I think their farm system is fairly deep on pitching right now, but they don't have any position players, and that's concerning. That's
it
very
is.
concerning.
Look, and if you're going to have one or the other, I think I'd rather have them be good at pitching in the farm system, because you always overpay for pitchers in free agency. even though the Rangers got their money's worth out of Nathan Eovaldi, and they're starting to get a return now on Jacob deGrom. But that was a huge investment. So we'll see where this all goes. They just need to, that's the thing about this. As I said, if you just have to get hit on a few of these guys, and then they play for 10 years, so that covers everything up, and it gives you plenty of grace there. The Rangers have just not done that. That goes back this whole century. We talk about Rugi Odor was the best player they produced, in over a decade at that point, and then he fizzled out. It was just they've just not had position players who have made a consistent career that they've lived with.
They went through that whole wave where they pushed guys really aggressively. Odor and Gallo and Mazzara, those guys got to the big leagues, and then they didn't improve at the big league level. And so I think they're, and we're saying this with the fact that Wyatt Langford played 50 games in the minor leagues before he got to the big leagues, but Wyatt Langford's the outlier. I don't think that should be the norm.
Yeah. No question about it. This organization has always been aggressive with players. That was the case back in the 80s. They were pushing guys fast back then too.
Well, they were pushing guys fast in the 70s when they brought David Clyde straight to the major league. But
that was the template right there.
Right. But by necessity, it had been that way for a long, long time. But in the 21st century, this has become one of the largest media markets, and the owners have become deep-pocketed and mostly stable until Tom Hicks decided to go on that buying spree and over-leveraged himself. And you have the ability to grow your farm system at a more moderate pace, and you should have the resources to plug holes at the big league level with free agency.
Yes, you should. Yes, you should. All right, that's going to do it for the Rangers segment of our podcast. We're going to move over now and talk about colleges a little bit because it's the halfway point of the season, 6 games in for most of these teams. And
this is the part of the podcast. This is the Texas is back segment, right?
No, not Texas is back. I do a little Best in Texas column every Sunday, and runs in Monday's paper, and so A&M, Texas A&M has been at the top of my rankings now for, I don't know, a month probably, because I think they're the best team in Texas. But I do think that Texas Tech is creeping up on the Aggies. And I think at this point, you have to look at the SEC and look how everyone's playing right now. And of course, now the Aggies have got a much tougher road coming here for them a little bit. But they're still not having to play Georgia or Alabama or Ole Miss, and Texas has at least got to play Georgia in a couple of weeks, or next month actually. But I do think that the way things are setting up right now, the Aggies look like a much more complete team to me than Texas does. Marcel Reed is playing at a higher level right now than Arch Manning is. And he has a couple of really dynamic receivers in Mario Craver and Casey Concepcion. Texas doesn't have that. I did think that Arch Manning looked better against Oklahoma. It was clear to me that finally Steve Sarkisian has listened to me and you, and he has decided that maybe I won't have him stand back there and looking downfield and trying to drive the ball down here all the time. Maybe I'll just throw it, east-west, and then I'll hang on my running game, which they did. And look, say what you want to about Oklahoma, and bless his heart, Brent Venables. I feel for the guy. At the press conference after the game, he comes in. The first thing he says in his opening statements was, "I just spoke to my team," and he had to stop and gather himself. He was getting emotional at that point. I'm sure he's emotional by the fact that he's lost 3 out of 4 tries against Texas now. And in those 3 losses, he's been outscored, 100 and I think it's 106-9. That's not good. And so in this game, you can say what you want to about their offense, and did they push John Mateer too hard to come back from that thumb injury and all of that? But that's a really good defense. They sacked Auburn 10 times, school record. And Auburn's not a bad team. and they got to Arch once, and then that was on a play where Arch was kind of already moved out of the pocket and was almost going to make a running play. So that was impressive for Texas to put that all together. But having said that, and their defense is really good. They had a bad game against Florida, and then they went back to get to Oklahoma against Oklahoma and played like they played previously. So I do think that they have a good defense, but the Aggies have a better all-around team. And I mean, who do you believe in the SEC, Evan, at this point?
Well, our friends at SEC Shorts, I want to have those guys on one time. I'd like to have those guys on as guests, but
yeah,
their skit this week had Texas A&M as representing the conference as the benchmark team, and then of course battered Aggie syndrome showed up to remind A&M rep just of all the things that could go wrong. Listen, every Saturday, my childhood best friend and I have a running tech conversation, usually during the Georgia game, and we just went back and forth and said that, look, I don't think that there is any team in the league this year that stands head and shoulders above everybody else. A&M is off to a really good start, but I do think, based on the history, they're going to have to carry this out a little bit longer for me to really completely buy in.
Well, they lost 3 of their last 4 SEC games last year,
right?
And we know about it. They were 7-1 at one point, and that was a great win over LSU, over a good LSU team. Now they fell apart a little bit too in the last part of the season, but yes, to your point, yes, they did fall apart last year. They're going to have to prove that this year they're not going to do the same thing.
So look, this is an interesting week in the league. Georgia's got Ole Miss this week. You've got Georgia, Texas coming up in November. A&M has LSU. Where is that, in Baton Rouge or College Station?
That's in Baton Rouge. I'll be down there for that game. That is next week.
Okay. So I mean, there's still look, with the enlargement of the league and NIL and the transfer portal, I just think it is, you're not going to know what a team is right out of the chute. I think it's going to take time for these teams to gel, and I don't know that at the halfway point I could call anybody an absolute favorite in this league.
Oh, I wouldn't either. I just think that the Aggies, it looks good for the Aggies at this point. They don't have the end of the season is not an awful schedule for them. I really think that it might come down to that game against Texas the day after Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
So we'll see if Texas can put this back together again. I just don't know. I do think that Georgia certainly had Texas number last year, beat them twice. So that will be a really hard game. I just can't imagine Texas winning that game at Georgia. I just don't think they're good enough. They did a great job against Oklahoma, and just their defense just won that game for them, and the conservative game plan, and the fact that they finally had a running game. All those things. They have to have all 3 of those things to be successful. Well, now let's talk a little bit about. Oh, go ahead.
There are 2 things on the Texas-Georgia game just to be aware of. Is look, Georgia has not played well in the first half at all this year, and then they've come out and made great adjustments, which is a Kirby thing. And secondly, apparently now Kirby is getting Nick Saban type treatment, because Georgia got a fumble on a ball that clearly was in the end zone for Auburn. And then later Kirby convinced the referees that he was not calling for timeout, but merely clapping. So that may work against Texas this year.
That's what they were doing, that SEC short thing. That was really funny.
That was unbelievable. I just think, listen, I think we talked about this last year, right? Because of the change in the dynamics, it was a great college football season. I think this college football season still has a whole lot left to go to determine where we're going to stand. And I like it better that way, that there is some mystery, that it's not 4 teams, and that they're going to be the 4 teams that are going to be standing at the end, and we'll see where it all goes, right? Oregon lost at home against Indiana this week, for crying out loud.
Yeah, who might be the next coach at Curt Cignetti might be the next coach at Penn State. I got to tell you, that was stunning to me that they fired
Oh,
him.
me too. I when I saw that headline, I blown away. But they've lost 3 in a row, so
But I know what the expectations were. There were people who said, or I was reading that before the season started that Penn State's the most talented team in the country, and probably should be ranked higher than Texas at that point. Well, that didn't work out for either one of those teams. Now let me switch over here to the Big 12 and talking about Texas Tech at this point. Texas Tech's closest game this year, a 24-point win over Houston, and in Houston. Now, Houston's not great by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a decent team, and that was at home, and they still scored 11 points, three, field goals and a safety. So that's pretty impressive. This is by far the best Texas Tech team that I have seen since the Mike Leach years, and he won 11 games one year and beat Texas. This team has a little bit of everything, though. This team has a defense. They've never had a defense before. That you'd have to go back a long ways to find Tech with good defenses. So I do think that this sets up very well for the Red Raiders. They play at Arizona this week. That's been problematic for a couple of teams in the league, but I just don't see anybody else challenging them at this point other than maybe BYU and
they seem to.
maybe
Well, I mean, the
Arizona State.
BYU game will be. They play BYU in Lubbock, right?
I think that's correct. Yes, that's late.
And I mean, they may just have to. If the student body shows up with an extra large order of tortillas, it's going to be curtains for BYU because, as we know, tortilla flinging really got under the skin of Kansas's staff. So,
Yes.
although I guess Leopold did say that there was at least one pocket knife flung in all of this, which that gets a little bit dangerous.
I just have a hard time imagining somebody doing that. But that's what they used to say about what was in Philadelphia. Jimmy Johnson said when they would throw snowballs at them, and that there would be batteries in them. It's like who's carrying batteries into the game? Hey man, I'm getting my D cell batteries here, and I'm gonna wrap them with snowballs, throw them. I mean, who makes these kind of decisions? But anyway, I do think that the Red Raiders are really good. I think they're good all around. Baron Morton there's been questions about his health and how well he's going to respond to that, but he's kind of missed time this year, and they've done a good job without him. And I just don't see anybody else in the Big 12 making a run at him.
To your point, right? I think you have to say that Texas Tech is much more a prohibitive favorite in the Big 12 than anybody is in the SEC at this point in time.
Yeah, and that's a. I tell you, when you look at the strength of the teams in the state, this is becoming a little bit unprecedented in this state to see A&M playing this well, to see Texas Tech playing this well, to see Texas ranked highly, and then for SMU, they're 10-0 now in the ACC since they've joined. If they can, they play Clemson this week. That ought to be a close game, and if they survive that, and then that brings them to November the 1st, that Miami comes to town. I don't. That doesn't look good to me. Miami's really good. I was out at that UNT game the other day, and that was really unfortunate. I'm so sorry for them. They get the biggest party in school history, and South Florida comes in there and ruins the drapes and pees on the carpet, and then runs off with the caterer. So it was a real mess for them. That South Florida team got hammered by Miami. So I think that's going to be really difficult for SMU. But at any rate, that's 4 teams in the state. And that because now I would think that probably UNT is out of the American race with South Florida. I think they're just clearly the class of that conference. But that's 4 teams in the state that are still in the running for their conference titles. And that's pretty good. Because I got to tell you, I once did a story going back in the history of the AP poll, and there are just a handful of times in that whole era. There was over about a 60 or 70 year period when A&M, Texas, and Oklahoma were all up at the same time. And my point in that writing that story was that they were all recruiting the same players. And so when one gets up, the other one has to go down. Basically, it's very different. Well, here you've got 4 teams in the state playing really well, and that's not even counting Oklahoma. 4 teams in the state playing well at the same time. And of course, it goes back to what you were talking about, NIL and the transfer portal and the difference that has made in this state as far as recruiting. And you can cuss it all you want to, and I'm not crazy about it either. But if it's improved the play of the schools in this state that much, state that I love, I gotta like that.
Yeah, I mean, in my home state, you've got Georgia ranked number 9, and Georgia Tech is ranked number 12. And it's been a long time since they've both been in the top 15. So, it does create an interesting landscape in college football, and it's kind of cool to see some different teams high up in the rankings. But I just don't think we fully understand the impact yet of the reshaped college landscape in terms of conference realignment, the latest round of realignment. We don't understand the landscape based on exactly where NIL and the transfer portal are going to lead us. And so it makes for a more uncertain environment.
Well, no question about that. Who knows where this is all going? I got no clue. But for now, as we pointed out, as we said last year, and I say this year, it's sure a lot of fun. These games and watching these games and what happens is just phenomenal.
It is a lot of fun. It's must see TV. Next week we got to do some Maverick stuff, don't we?
We do have to talk about the Mavericks next week because they'll be getting ready to start out. They start out on the 22nd. So yeah, that's next week. We will talk about the Mavericks next week. We'll hopefully have Mike Curtis on, our Mavericks beat writer, to talk about them and going into their opener next Wednesday.
Which might be refreshing since we don't have to talk about the Cowboys too much.
Well, we can talk about it. We just won't talk about it very much. It's like more of the same. Well, I think we might do it. Just say, see last week's podcast for more Cowboys information. Yeah. All right, that's going to do it for this week. We appreciate you coming in and listening. We will be back, as we said, next week to talk more about all this stuff, and plus adding the math to the formula. That'll be fun. And the Stars are playing as well, too. We'll talk about the Stars, we promise. We're not very good at talking about the Stars, but we'll find somebody who is.
We can talk about the different suburbs that they're going to move to.
Yeah, that's always a good story. So from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.